YouTube. I've been hopefully anticipating some problems of evil against the recent project between Veritas and Dow Films and myself, but I've so far not been seeing a lot of specific arguments from evil, and so this has kind of left me wanting since it's an area of interest that I have. However, Veritas48 and FGB have been having an interesting discussion on YouTube about the problem of evil recently, and I'd like to outline their discussion very briefly in my video and in the discussion, and the discussion will have a little more detail than in video, and then give my 2 cents on the discussion. So basically, very crudely put, on the topic of the coexistence of unnecessary suffering and evil with a benevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient God, FGB argues that excessive evil is a type of evidence against God's existence, and that we form ideas on what is observed and not what is potentially the case. Noah, on the other hand, argues that evil is not good evidence against the existence of God, because God could rather have a sufficient reason for permitting evil, and finite human expectations may be the real problem in the problem of evil, since we are talking about a benevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient God that the argument assumes. What I'd like to do is first comment on Noah and FGB's conversation, and then critique the argument from evil as presented by FGB. First off, I think the conversation between Noah and FGB on humanity's epistemic position concerning evil is fruitful and important for at least 2 very important reasons. On the one hand, human beings are in fact limited, I think, and finite, thus their expectations compared to the omniscient God that the argument assumes causes considerable doubt on said expectations, as Noah argues. So on that point I'm with Noah. However, on the other hand, evidentialist arguments from excessive evil are not worthless just because human beings are finite in their understanding, as FGB alludes to when championing the evidential excessive argument from evil. All this to say that while atheists may be able to discredit some forms of theism via the evidential problem, the final defeat of all theistic positions known and only known through omniscience is far from demonstrated, I think. Meaning, for example, that the specific evidential problem of evil might disprove hard Calvinism, or soft Arminianism, let's say, in Christianity, but it would not prove Christianity proper. Or you could argue perhaps that the evidential problem of evil would disprove some specific religion, but not another one. It just depends on the theological system's points of interest in truth. Concisely then, it seems that the excessive evil argument on the one hand serves a vital function in demonstrating which theistic systems, whether that be across religion or subsets within a specific religion, are false or defendable, and thus the argument from evil is very helpful. But on the other hand, what Noah has argued for is a factual problem that any evidential problem of evil must account for, that finite human beings have a better perspective on evil than the greatest conceivable being, which seems problematic by definition. Now, having commented on the discussion between Noah and FGB, I would like once again to talk about the problem of evil. However, before I respond to FGB's argument from excessive evil, I'd like to point out a very important distinction when discussing the problem of evil. The distinction is this: there is no, quote, the problem of evil. In actuality, the problem of evil can be subdivided into at least 4 major categories, those being logical, evidential, probabilistic, and emotional, and then separated again into various subdivisions, example, moral evil, natural evil, gratuitous evil, excessive evil, etc. So it goes without saying that when the problem of evil is used against God, that we be very specific in what we are saying. Moreover, it is also important to realize that the theodicies given are not always meant to cover all the differing types of evil. For example, the free will defense may be used for moral evil, but one may use the natural law theodicy in defense against natural evil. So basically, there may be more than one reason why specific types of evil exist, and so we can't pigeonhole the theist into one specific defense given the various different subdivisions of evil. Having made that distinction, I would like to discuss the argument from gratuitous evil. Now, there is an important distinction between the quantity of evil and the gratuitousness or the severity of evil. For one may claim either that there is too much evil because some is gratuitous, or that all evil has a purpose but God could achieve that goal with less evil. The point is, however, that no matter how hard one tries, one cannot discover any morally sufficient reason for God to allow these evils to exist. Thus, God does not exist. We could form this problem deductively as follows. 1. If G is true, then assuming that MP is true, E should not be true. 2. It is probable that E is true. 3. Therefore it is probable that G is false. Now, a lot could be said about this argument specifically, but as a general point to this argument, one could say that the one who assumes that the theological premise is true errs in thinking that by adding successive instances of apparent pointless evil, they raise the likelihood that the theological premise is true and therefore God does not exist. However, adding apparent instances of evil does not suffice, as one would have to investigate each by a case-by-case basis. But these thoughts aside, I think the argument from Gratuitous Evil is problematic for at least two reasons. Those being, one, the argument assumes and commits several fallacies that invalidate it following Jane Shro's thoughts, and two, several theodicies could be offered that lessen the force of the theological premise it assumes. First, it seems to beg the question. Claiming that there is genuinely gratuitous suffering means that there is no purpose to it, but to say that there is no purpose to it rejects one possible purpose, namely God's. So in other words, the atheist begs the question. Put another way, consider the three following propositions. 1. There appears to be no purpose to y, where y is an instance of apparent gratuitous suffering. 2. There is some non-apparent purpose to y. And 3. There is in fact no purpose to y. Now, atheists might argue that one should move from 1 to 3, but in doing so, they reject 2. The problem here is that this just begs the question, for in order to deny 2, one must make certain other assumptions. Specifically, one can never be certain that there are cases of gratuitous suffering unless one is certain that there is no God. But this would be to assume precisely what the argument is trying to prove, therefore it begs the question. Second, the claim that the most reasonable position in light of what we know is that God does not exist commits the fallacy from ignorance. This is committed in arguing the following way. 1. It seems that unless it can be shown that all cases of apparently gratuitous suffering are in fact not purposeless, it is most reasonable to believe that they are as they appear to be. 2. Since it cannot be shown that they are in fact not purposeless. 3. Therefore, it is reasonable to believe that they are as in fact they appear to be, since there appears to be such cases in the world. Now, if this is the atheist argument, the second premise commits the fallacy from ignorance. Third, the move from gratuitous evil to there is no God seems to be erroneously moving from an inductive to a universal claim. Consider the three following propositions again. 1. There appears to be no purpose to y, where y, again, is an instance of apparently gratuitous suffering. 2. There is some non-apparent purpose to y. And 3. There is, in fact, no purpose to y. Now, even if we consider 1 as inductively valid, the atheist still has no warrant to move from that existential claim to 3, which is a universal claim. To illustrate this point, consider a similar argument about the existence of elves. Proposition 1 states, quote, I have no reason to believe that there are elves, end quote, while Proposition 2 states, quote, there are no elves, end quote. The former is an inductive claim, whereas the latter is a universal claim. The former is verifiable, whereas the latter is not, since it could only be verified by counting every case of non-elfdom, but this just means the second proposition can only be falsified. Since one really can't move from the former to the latter claim, the most one could say about the latter is that one is undecided about whether there are in fact no elves. The same can be said about gratuitous evil. Two claims are made. 1. I have no reason to believe that there is a purpose to y, and 2. There is no purpose to y. Just as in the case of elves, the move here from the former to the latter is unjustified. The inductive claim is verifiable, but the universal is not, for it could only be verified by counting all cases of non-purposelessness, if that's even a word. And obviously that cannot be done. Hence it is most reasonable to behold that at present one cannot decide if there are cases of gratuitous suffering. Fourth, several theodicies can be made against the theological premise. Given human agency in assuming moral evil, how can there be any clearly defined limits to how much gratuitous evil there may be? If one points to natural evil, then the theist could respond that there must be some kind of natural order within which free creatures can operate. Free rational action requires a world of natural objects governed by natural laws. Therefore, free choice involves deliberation, choosing, and then putting choices into practice. However, if there are not a stable, predictable natural order, deliberation and action would be tremendously hampered and possibly eliminated.